Okay, so in the last video, I gave you some reasons to think that there's not a good argument for cultural relativism. Just because different people disagree about what's morally right or wrong, that's no reason to conclude that, well, what's right is right for the folks who believe it is, and wrong for the folks who believe that it's wrong. And that's true because, I mean, look, you can't say the same thing about the shape of the Earth. You don't say, well, because people disagree about what the shape of the Earth is, it's flat for the folks who believe it's flat, and round for the folks who believe it's round. No, there's a fact of the matter there. The Earth is spherical. The folks who believe it's flat, they've just got a false belief. The folks who believe that it is spherical, their belief is true. Now you might think, well, I don't know, maybe we came to the wrong conclusion from these premises, these observations that different people have different beliefs about what's morally right and wrong. So maybe what we should have concluded is not something about cultural relativism. Maybe we should have concluded that moral nihilism must be correct. So moral nihilism is another meta-ethical theory, and that just says, look, all this talk about stuff being morally right or wrong, like, that's just all nonsense. Nothing is morally right or morally wrong. Moral facts just don't exist. You know, if you go back to thinking about geology, like we were last week, geological nihilists would say, yeah, all this business of, like, sorting the rocks into the igneous and the metamorphic, etc., that's all misguided because rocks don't exist in the first place. And so you might think, well, maybe we should be moral nihilists because after all, look, different people have different moral beliefs, so maybe there's just no fact of the matter, one way or another. The Aztecs think that human sacrifice is okay. You West folks in contemporary society think it's wrong, so maybe there's no fact of the matter, right? Like, this whole rightness and wrongness thing just does not exist. Well, notice again, this is just not a good reason to believe in moral nihilism. And you can see again by analogy, by thinking about the shape of the Earth, right? We can say, well, look, there's this whole culture that believes the Earth is flat, and then this whole other culture that believes the Earth is spherical. Well, it'd be ridiculous to conclude from that, well, the Earth just doesn't have a shape. Well, it has a shape, it's just that people disagree about what that shape is. Some of them are right, some of them are wrong. So we come at last to this meta-ethical conclusion that, look, there are indeed moral facts that exist independently of our own desires and independently of the beliefs of other people. And so there are facts about what is morally right or wrong, independent of what anyone actually believes. And this isn't, like, so out there a view. It's the sort of thing we believe about, say, the shape of the Earth as well, right? Like, the Earth has a particular shape, whether anyone believes it or not. Back when everyone thought the Earth was flat, well, everyone was just wrong. The Earth was still just hanging out there in space, being all spherical, even though everyone had a wrong belief about it. And any evidence to the contrary, or without any evidence to the contrary, it seems like, moral absolutism here seems like the best meta-ethical theory that we've got going. Some things are indeed morally wrong, and they're morally wrong even if you really want to do them. And so, if that's the case, then our plan is to try and figure out, right, we want to make sure that we don't have false beliefs about what's morally right or wrong. We want to figure out which things are morally wrong and which things are morally right. But then you're like, but how do we do that? Well, you take this class and I'll explain it to you. Don't worry. But, I get that you might be a little worried. You're like, look, Andrew, it's not that I don't know how to do that. I maybe don't know how to do that, but I don't even see how you could possibly figure out what's morally right and morally wrong. I mean, after all, it's not like, I can go out there and just, like, look at some magic moral particles and see, which are the wrong ones and which are the right ones. I don't even know what to look for here. And so then you might conclude, look, I guess maybe we ought to be moral nihilists after all, because, look, I just don't see how we could possibly know what's morally right or morally wrong. Therefore, yeah, there must not be any fact of the matter. Well, this is, again, another bad reason to be a moral nihilist. I'll show it again to you by analogy. So just because you don't know something, and just because you're not even sure exactly how you would figure that out, that does not allow you to conclude that there's just no fact of the matter. So think about, instead of being a moral nihilist, think about being maybe what you could call a hair nihilist. So you can notice, take a look at this nice photo of Abraham Lincoln up above me. You might want to know, well, how many hairs are on Abraham Lincoln's head in this photo? Now, notice, it's a true thing that there is just no way we're ever going to be able to know how many hairs are on Lincoln's head in this photo. I don't even know how we would possibly go about trying to figure that out. We could come up with some estimate, like, I don't know, like maybe 95,000 or so, but no, if you want to know for certain the exact number of hairs on his head in that photo, ain't going to happen. We don't know how we could possibly do that. But notice, just because we don't know how to figure it out, and just because we will never know the answer, does not mean that there is no answer. We can't conclude that, well, there is no definite fact of the matter about how many hairs are on Lincoln's head there. No, there's definitely a fact of the matter about how many hairs are on his head. It's just that we don't know it, and we never will. Kind of sucks for us, I guess, if you're really into knowing the number of hairs on a person's head, but that's how it is. That is the human condition. So notice the same can be true for moral facts. Even if we don't know exactly which things are morally right and which things are morally wrong, and even if we might not know exactly how we could figure that out, it's still entirely possible that there are some actions that are morally wrong and other actions that are morally okay, and they're out there for us to figure out if we can try. And look, the thing with the hairs on Lincoln's head, that seems a little hopeless, but notice this is the sort of situation where we're not really sure how we could ever possibly know something, and yet there's a fact of the matter anyway. That is the situation we're in science, for example, all the time. So think about a recent dispute that's come up where different cosmologists, physicists who study the nature of the universe as a whole, they're trying to figure out just how fast the universe is expanding. For a long time, back in the 90s, they were trying to figure out, well, wait, is it going to keep expanding, or is it going to start shrinking back into itself, or is it just expanding at the same rate, or is it going to expand faster and faster and faster? Well, they think they finally figured that out, and they know it's expanding, but depending on how they measure that expansion, they get two different measurements. So one measurement gives them that the universe is expanding at 73.5 kilometers per second per megaparsec, and another gives them a value of 67 kilometers per second per megaparsec. And what's weird is that this doesn't seem to be just like a measurement error, it's roughly in the high 60s, low 70s, but there's a lot of room for error. No, both of these measurements are really precise, and they cannot figure out, oh fuck, which one is correct. We just don't know. We don't know which one is correct. Right now, we're not even certain how we could possibly distinguish between those two values. And yet, we're not going to just throw up our hands and say, well, I guess there's no fact of the matter whether the universe is expanding at one speed rather than the other. No, it clearly is. There's clearly a right answer here. We just don't know what it is. And that's what makes science so hard. A scientist doesn't go to work every day and be like, oh, I've got to crack open the science textbook where all the science facts are, and that's how I'll learn stuff. No, I know it's kind of the shitty way that we sometimes teach science these days, but that ain't how science works. You've got to figure stuff out by hook or by crook, and it's not always clear how to do that. You don't want to just throw up your hands and say, well, gosh, if we don't know now, we'll never be able to know. There must not be any fact of the matter. No, you go around and try and figure out if you can come up with the answer. And that's exactly the situation that we're in with ethical problems as well. We can presume, look, there has got to be a fact of the matter, whether something is morally right or morally wrong. It might not be immediately clear to us. just whether it's morally right or morally wrong, or how he would come to find that out. But we've got to have some way of figuring it out. So here's what I propose. How are we going to figure out whether something's morally right or morally wrong? So first of all, you might just look to see where we agree, and might see, yeah, most people agree it's just like clearly morally wrong to torture little kids to death for fun. Like, if you think that's morally okay, yeah, that's wrong, right? But then, of course, there's lots of places where people are going to disagree, and those are the more interesting cases to look at. Those are the cases we want to look at in this class. So then you want to know, well, given that people disagree about this, how do we figure out who is right and who is wrong? Just like those physicists, when they figure out, oh shoot, this group of physicists figures that the universe is expanding at that rate, this group thinks it's expanding at this other rate. Well, you don't throw up your hands, you say like, oh gosh, well how can we figure out who's right and who's wrong? That's what we're doing in this class, and one good way of doing that is to say, okay, so maybe you disagree about whether, say, I don't know, it's morally okay to abort a fetus. Really strong disagreements there. You want to know, well, is it morally okay or is it not morally okay? Well, one way of doing that is to step back and see, well, look, maybe you disagree with one another about whether it's morally okay to kill a fetus or not, but maybe there are some more general moral principles that you do agree with. And once we figure out what those general moral principles are, then we can see, well, what conclusion do those general moral principles lead to about what you morally ought or ought not do when it comes to abortion or any other controversial moral issue, like the ones we'll be looking at in this class. And so that process of trying to look at these underlying general principles, that is normative ethics. That's what we're going to be taking a look at this week, and the next week we'll be looking at a couple general theories of what these underlying principles that we all might get on board with could be. So this week we'll be taking a look at consequentialism, and this is the idea that, look, if we assume that some things are morally right and other things are morally wrong, what we want to do is figure out which of those are, right, which are wrong. So what you need to do that is to see, well, what are the consequences of the action? Once you figure out the consequences of an action, then you can figure out whether it's morally right or morally wrong. So what we'll do this week is see in detail just how that's going to work out. All right, I'll touch base with you later and see what you all think about consequentialism.